in the Treasures of Madison County Museum in Madison, Florida. And I've been asked to do a little talk about the operation of this antique motion picture projector. I operated one very similar to this as a teenager when I was in high school. That was in the theater known as the Swan Theater in Madison, located on the north end of Range Street, right across from what's known as the Dial House. There's just a vacant lot now. Back in the 1940s, the Swan Theater had two projectors very similar to this that you needed two so that you could operate the movie continuously without interruptions. When I was a young lad of 8 to 10 years old, I would attend the Swan Theater when the price of admission was 10 cents. And this was a real bargain. And later, when I was over 12 years old, it went up to 25 cents, and that was still a bargain. And then as a teenager, where I was employed by the Swan Theater people as a projectionist on a part-time basis, then I could go to the movies free anytime I wanted, and I did. The machine that I operated was very, very similar to this. This one has updated a little bit. I think the one I operated was even older. The film was delivered to the theater in large steel cases that would hold 4 or 5 of these large 2,000-foot reels of 35mm film. A typical movie would be 5 or 6 reels, and each reel would run about 20 to 22 minutes. And it was where you had the A projector and the B projector. To begin the movie, you'd usually start with the A projector with reel 1, and the reel number 2 would be on the B projector. So when the movie reel was about 3 minutes to the end, it would fire up the projector B so that when the time came to make the change, it would be ready. There was a little tiny black spot on the top right-hand corner of the screen which gave you a cue on when to start the second projector, and it's hardly noticeable unless you're looking for it. But the first cue would be to start the second projector. The second cue would be make the switch, and it's usually done so nobody would ever notice it if you did it right. And in those days, we kind of did it manually. Later on, they did electronic means of doing it, which was a little more reliable. I mentioned the film came in these big, heavy cases and had to be lugged up several flights of stairs because the projection room was always at the very top of the building. And the film you'd spread out into a bin that had the different reel numbers, so reel 1, 2, 3, and so forth. So you once it came off of the projector, you put it back in the proper bin, so you didn't get it mixed up, because that really would confuse people if you showed a film out of order. But it did happen occasionally. The film would be loaded into this top magazine and threaded down through the intermittent movement into the sound drum and onto a lower magazine which appears to be missing. But back in the 40s, it was there. The film would be wound on that, and once the film had been shown through, it would be removed and rewound and put back in the proper slot. And then while number 2 reel was running, number 3 would go on to the A projector. And one of the unique things about the film was 24 frames per second, but the film ran through intermittently. It would be stopped for an instant and advance very quickly to the next frame, stop, move very quickly to the next frame, and so forth at 24 times per second. So that whenever the film was actually moving, there was a shutter right here that would block the light source. So on the screen, you didn't see the film actually move. You just see a series of still pictures at 24 frames per second. But the flicker rate at 24 seemed a little more noticeable, so they would actually block the light once while the picture was stationary. But this gave a flicker rate of 48 times per second, made it less noticeable. The sound mechanism here, the sound was recorded optically on an optical track on the side of the 35 millimeter film. And this density of this track would vary depending on the audio content. And there was an exciter, incandescent exciter lamp here that would focus a beam right on that optical sidetrack into a photocell. And that photocell would generate a very tiny electrical current depending on the amount of light striking it. So the density of the film would change at the audio rate, the electrical current would change at the audio rate, and then it was fed to a bank of amplifiers that were very husky amplifiers that would amplify this very small current to a level that could drive the gigantic speaker system, which was located behind the screen. The screen appeared to be solid, but actually if you got close, there were many hundreds of tiny holes which would allow the sound to come right through the screen and hit you in the face. And this is what happened. The light source, back in those days, the arc lamp was about the only thing available to produce the amount of light necessary to project a film, the distance and so forth to a screen. They call it an arc lamp because it burned 2 carbon rods about 1/4 inch in diameter and about 6 or 8 inches long that were placed on a carriage driven by servo motors and a worm gear, and with the high voltage on the plus side and the negative. And once you would strike this thing, just touch it momentarily, it would produce an arc, and you would separate it to about 3/8 of an inch. And this would burn very, very brightly. And it had to be maintained very precisely in this spot here, so that this mirror reflector down here could focus the beam of light through a condenser lens and through this lens all the way to the screen. And it was somewhat automatic, but the operator had to view it here and also up here to keep that space exactly right and to keep the horizontal position in the exact point to have the light concentrated where it should be. besides the very bright light, there was quite a bit of heat produced, and you can see there's a place to put a stovepipe and vent it to the outside. However, the Swan Theater people chose not to do that, so the heat came out into the projection room, and even though the theater was air conditioned, the projection room got quite warm at times. Now, a few years later, the arc lamp was replaced by what's called a xenon lamp, which made it a lot more reliable, and you didn't have to bother with the carbon rods or anything. And the optical track was augmented by magnetic tracks, so we could get stereo sound, surround sound, and all kinds of special effects on these magnetic tracks. And then came where widescreen came in. They wanted to use the same projectors and the same film, so they came up with what's called an anamorphic lens, which actually takes the view and compresses it, squeezes it in, so it's all in the 35 millimeter film. But if you looked at it, all the fat people would look skinny and everything because they're squished in. But when it's projected, it goes through another anamorphic lens, which spreads it out, and you get the wide screen, the same film, the same projector, surround sound, same equipment. But then later, instead of two projectors, they wound up where they would put the film on a great big disc about 4 or 5 feet in diameter, and it was horizontally. The film would be fed from the center through the projector back to the outside, so that it could run continuously. And there was no need to change to another projector or anything, so the other projector could be used to feed another audience and another screen, and that's the way it was used. With the xenon lamp, there was no problem in having to change the rods or anything. The very latest thing is digital. Everything is, instead of on film, the film was eliminated entirely. And the producers of the movies produce them in digital video form, and it's delivered to the local theaters by satellite and shown through a video projector. And this is the way of the future, and it's being done now in some places. So that's about it. I'd like to thank John Ludwig for producing this video, and
He did it.
I'll bid you a good day.